Okay, so it's 9 a.m. here, and I'm sure others will come on. But for those who are watching me, I want to first of all say that today is Vesak, and what Vesak is a celebration of the Buddha's birth, his day of enlightenment, and his passing into Parinirvāna. And so all those great events in his life are celebrated on a single day, the full moon in Vesak, in month in the Buddhist calendar, which falls on today. And in honor of Vesak, which Buddhists from all over the world are celebrating today, I just wanted to acknowledge the Buddha and his teaching, and his great teaching, and the significance of his life and contribution, and just the meaning of that for us 2,500 years later. Although we don't know exactly when the Buddha lived. There's still a lot of debate about that. And what does all of this actually have to do with meditation, with our life? And I was really thinking about that a lot last night and this morning before giving this talk, because so often meditation teachings that were, in a sense, born and developed within a Buddhist context, Buddhist culture, have in modern times been taken away from that culture and put into more of a, secular, non-Buddhist arena, while still maintaining some of the basic elements of the Buddhist teaching, but I think quite a bit gets lost. And I'm reminded today of a talk I gave about 7 or 8 years ago in Bangkok at a conference where I presented a paper, and that conference happened to be over Vesak, so I got to see how this holiday celebrated in Thailand, which was just phenomenal. I would just say, because Thailand is a Buddhist country, considerable amount of pomp and expense, and just just amazing. When I was a monk in Sri Lanka, a much poorer country, things were done kind of in a more low-key way, but Thailand, it was quite amazing. So when I was invited to give a paper, I wrote about the Buddha's theory of language. And that may sound really intellectual, real heady at first, but I think it's incredibly important to understand in meditation practice our use of language. And sometimes, like some of the criticism I got was that meditation is wordless. We don't need language. In fact, it's beyond words in many respects. Our experience of our breath, of body sensations, of emotions, it's happening in a very raw way that is not part of language. And when we go into other states of consciousness, very deep, maybe empty, spacious, concentrated states of mind, words may actually get in the way. They may actually make it so that we don't fully experience, we just keep trying to fit the experience into words. But I have taken a different look at it. And part of that is really, I believe that our use of language helps to extend our capacity to investigate. It pushes our horizons. And if we don't have words for an experience, especially a single word, which I think is not a good idea. I don't believe that we should really be trying to find the right word to match our experience. My take on it is it's better to try to describe it and to take it apart a bit, to know the various things that are going on in our experience, and language helps us do it. And language may not necessarily always be verbal. Any representation, drawing, movement, all sorts of things that we may use to describe something may actually help us in identifying a bit, getting closer to what our experience is. And that's part of the interplay between words and experience. When you have a name for something, you feel like you know it suddenly. You really have an instant, sense of, I know what this is because I have a word for it. But that may actually go away after a while when you find that, well, just having a word is one thing. But now, especially when it comes to human emotions, human experience, there's more to it. So you might have a word for a feeling or experience, like you have a word like anxiety for a range of experience that you have. But when you sit and meditate and go really into those anxious feelings, that word may actually just kind of go away. And you find that you don't actually know it as anxiety. You know it right now as this particular sensation in your chest, some thoughts about the future, a wanting to get up and go and do something. You might notice that there are various things within that experience that are shifting and changing each time you have it. And so anxiety is just a handy word to describe it, but the experience itself, as you sit and meditate with it, can be fresh and new and reveal various things about it. And I believe that that's what the Buddha was actually teaching. He didn't shy away from language around experience. He talked about cravings and ill will and peace and bliss and joy and equanimity and loving kindness, and he created, in a sense, a whole vocabulary to talk about meditation and meditative experience, but it wasn't meant to be a set of words that you use, that you just put onto your experience each time and say, well, this was joy, this was metta or loving kindness, this was compassion. It was more as a way of saying, look here, investigate here. This word is that I've given you is enough to get you to look in that area. Now really look, really go into what is compassion. What is your experience of thinking about somebody who is suffering and how you are relating to that, how you have empathy or understanding for that person's condition, and how you would like to help and do things, and that you build a certain, maybe even fantasy or ideas about what you should do or how you should be with this compassion. Explore those dimensions of your experience. That is what feeling compassion is. It's filled with many different things that are going on. Same thing with loving kindness or even equanimity, even a state of not being so, say, pushed and pulled by the experience, not going back and forth with emotions and being able to take it in. There may actually be more subtleties in that experience than the word allows for. And that's what we're also looking for when we recollect our meditation experiences. While you're meditating, you might find that, yes, you keep going back to the fact that you're feeling maybe low or sad or anxious or a bit relaxed and calm or carefree. But once you start to reflect back on the sitting and journal about it, you might find that you get more words, more description around what is going on. And I believe that when you start to describe your experience with greater description, you're getting closer to it. That some of the language we use at first creates a connection, like you use the word anxiety and suddenly you feel connected to your anxiety. But after a while, it may actually produce a kind of separation, a sense of, I already know this. I don't need to really feel it anymore. I don't need to go through anything around it. I understand it. But that's not the case. Once you're caught in any experience, anger, angry experience, or cravings, or ill will, you have to learn it again fresh. You're caught. And I think that's the beauty of meditation practice and the Buddhist teaching, is that we don't kind of think something's gone away. We think, we've understood it to a certain point. But now, we have to take another look, another investigation, another way of trying to understand what really keeps this anger going, what really keeps these particular feelings that I have alive, or particular attachments. So what I'm really trying to get at here is what I have referred to in some of my talks, and in the way kind of looking at it, is that we have a label like anger. It works for a little while, but we have to crack that open. We have to break it open and actually see, what is this new, fresh experience I have of anger? What is it about? And is it actually anger? Because as you look at it, you might find, well, especially if you have a pretty good vocabulary around some of these emotions, you might see that there's resentment or contempt, or it's not really anger. It's just kind of like a hurt that makes you upset, and perhaps has some rage to it. And to go into your experience and just really get at some of these nuances is something that you may be able to do in a meditation sitting, but you can definitely do it when you recollect it, especially if you have a fairly good memory of that kind of experience. So what I would like for you to consider in today's meditation is that you can allow whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, whatever's going on in your meditation sitting, and maybe at times notice, are you using words that kind of are like habitual, automatic, that seem to distance you, And if that's the case, just take a moment and reflect, what is it I'm actually experiencing when I use this word? When I say that I'm calm or content, what is actually going on here? What am I feeling in my body? What are some of the thoughts that I have? Or is there imagery that comes with my calmness, or a certain light, or a certain kind of vibration or tone? And the same thing, if it's something a little bit more negative, if you keep calling an experience getting angry or anger, notice too, what is that like? Try to see if you can get some other descriptions around it. And whether it's anger or something else, something subtler, something closer to what you're experiencing. And when you do this, to really try to use your own words. Sometimes, you might find it's just a sentence that comes to you, a remark about somebody or yourself that really hits the mark, or it's a saying or metaphor. And you don't have to search for it. You might find that your mind is pretty much able to kind of identify a bit of what kind of terms, what kind of things it actually considers an experience to be. And my suggestion with this too is that you don't take your new assumptions about what your experience is as the truth. You take it as, well, this seems to be valid right now. It seems to be helping me to get somewhere, to be interested again in looking at this particular emotion or this particular way of thinking. Instead of saying, well, this is how it is now. This is what seems to be so at this moment. And to me, that's part of the Buddhist teaching. The Buddha was actually trying to help people not come to conclusions, but to get interested in the experience enough to really see what's going on. And that's really, I believe, the part of the Buddhist practice, the Buddhist agenda in understanding our experience. So I'd like for us to have a meditation sitting for half an hour this morning. I'll ring a bell at 9:45 a.m. I'll come back on. I don't meditate in front of the camera, so you'll just see a sign, meditation in progress. And those of you on Instagram, I'm going to turn this off, and I'll turn it back on at 9:45, and then I'll begin the talk again at 9:50. There'll be 5 minutes for journaling or for a little break before I resume the talk. Thank you. Okay, so take a moment and reflect back on the sitting and just see what you can remember about it. And if you'd like to journal, do some journaling. And when you come across some of these words that you tend to just, like you categorize your experience, just try to give a bit fuller description. See if you can recollect and crack open that label and see what's really inside of it. And I'm just going to stay here for another 5 minutes, and I'll begin to talk at 9:50, another 4 minutes. Okay. Okay, I'll begin in a couple of minutes. All right. Um, Along with looking at the labels that we use and coming up with a different way to describe our experience, comes looking at your stories. And I realize that most people, when they receive Vipassana meditation instructions or mindfulness meditation, they're often told, don't get involved with your stories. Don't kind of go into these narratives, the stories about yourself, about other people, about what you're thinking about in the future, your memories of the past. But I would say, actually, let yourself go into the stories. Let yourself know the stories that are circulating in your mind. And the thing is that we actually do need to know these narratives in order to be free of them. We can't just, adopt another story and that says all of this is impermanent, or all of it's suffering, or all of it's a waste of time, and I shouldn't be thinking about it. That just doesn't work. We actually need to know what keeps these stories alive. And going back to my earlier talk, you might find that some of the stories are really deeply rooted in particular kinds of language. They're a way of talking about experience without having examined it. They're a way of looking at yourself and other people just really on the surface and not seeing the different dynamics, the different things that are going on underneath. And meditation is the perfect place to be able to look at a particular story about yourself and consider, is this really true? And I've seen that in meditators, throughout my 30 years of teaching meditation, of coming out of meditation sitting and saying, I can't believe I actually carried that story with me for much of my life. I really don't understand how it had so much stickiness, how it really held on to me. And this is really important, that we are using our minds and we're using language in a way to fix a self, to create a particular sense of who we are. And it's not something that we necessarily, decided to do. It's just something that we've been doing, since we were very young. And we continue to do it. We continue to have stories about ourselves, about others, and we attach certain words to them and characteristics. And of course, often many of us don't particularly like it when somebody has a story about us and characterizes us in a certain way that we're not. So we're doing that to ourselves. We're actually living at times with stories about ourselves and characterizing ourselves in a particular way that has no longer become helpful or insightful, that instead has actually distanced ourselves from various things that are changing and developing within our experience. So I would tend, to suggest that if you do have a particular story about yourself that you keep noticing, you keep coming up, like a particular way you identify yourself, maybe as, anxious, depressed, or, compulsive, whatever. Those are just psychological terms, but you could also identify yourself as a particular kind of person who has a certain background, or comes from a certain city or locale, or has a certain vocation or education. There's so many ways in which we create stories about who we are and what we are, that any of those, whenever they come up, you might actually start to look at, well, what else is there? Is there something more to me when I'm anxious, rather than, telling myself I'm an anxious person? Is there something more to this experience? And does this experience define me? Does the place where I was born and the school I went to and the people I know, or is that, who I am? Most likely not. But there's still a way that you might find you have stories that you identify yourself in that manner. So just as you might use a label to fix an identity, or to fix an emotion, or to say this is what I feel and this is the kind of person I am, you might have more elaborate stories. So in this kind of meditation practice, I often suggest that people actually take a look at those stories, write them down, get a sense of how they're still active in your life. And it's not necessarily that they're going to go away, or that they're, that the idea is to separate from them and have them vanish. The idea actually in much of this work is to loosen around it. It's to become softer around those labels and stories and self-identification, knowing that they will crop up here and there, but they don't have to be the whole picture. They don't have to be everything that you are. And it's hard for us to do this because some of the stories we're really attached to, especially if it's stories about particular talents or successes or milestones that we've reached, or certain ways that people have perceived us that we're really happy about. And to look at that, there's a certain kind of joy or satisfaction in that story, and that makes you probably overly attached to it. It makes a certain create something where if somebody says something different about you or goes against that story, you're hurt, you're affected. And I believe we're all that way for the most part, that we have our own sense of reputation, and if someone goes against that, we feel hurt. We have our own sense of integrity, and if somebody says that we're not that way, we're hurt. And we have certain things about us that we're really attached to, and we don't sometimes notice it until something comes up in our life that pokes a hole in it and gets us to react around it, and then we may notice it. So even in this approach to meditation, I don't see it as a way to quickly get to a place of non-reactivity. In fact, it's probably going to be a good thing at times to know that you're sensitive to certain things, and to care for yourself and have kindness to yourself around that sensitivity. So it's quite a few things I've said here, and I just hope that as you continue to meditate in an open meditation practice, that you don't feel frustrated by the way your mind is, I mean, let me put it this way. You can feel frustrated, but that you don't have to believe it and take it on as frustration. You may actually be making some really good progress. One thing, which I'd like to say kind of at the end of this kind of talk is when you notice your resistance to a particular truth coming up about yourself, when you notice that you want to move away from it, you want to go somewhere else, you'd rather keep the old story than investigate it and find out what's really going on. There's something happening in yourself, in your practice. There's some kind of shift or change. That's something that was really solid, really very much in place, a kind of barrier or hindrance or obstruction from, using Buddhist terminology, that has actually, shown itself. And to kind of see, okay, maybe I'm onto something. If my mind is resisting this, maybe I'm going in a good direction. If I'm having a hard time sitting with this story, with these new insights I'm having, maybe there's something more to it. And so this kind of meditation practice may actually lead to you writing more about it afterwards, talking to people about your experiences. It may actually kind of go out into your life as something that you're working on, and that's important for us. I do believe that our inner life is also our work. I recently had a conversation with a student who didn't feel like meditation was work at first, like other things were work. And after talking to him, I started to get the sense that, that may be a bit more common for us. That for many, many people, sitting in meditation may seem like it's a break, or it's there to calm, it's there to soothe, it's there to change, to have a different feeling, a different orientation to life and to our relationships. But maybe it's also going to turn out to be just this whole new area of inner work. And to let your meditation practice be that, instead of confining it to just one particular technique or one goal or one thing, but it's much larger than that. We are, of course, much greater than what we think. The I'm getting questions. The problem with the questions that I heard from Facebook is that they might be last week's questions, but I'll answer them as though they're coming today. So someone asked me, my limited understanding of neuroscience is that we tend to strengthen the pathways of what we think about. We tend to train the mind from that angle. What is the use of wandering mind? Do we not strengthen that habit and neurons? Okay, well that question is a very good question, because it is one of the main critiques around an open meditation practice. That if you allow yourself to actually feel the anger or to go into cravings or fantasies, that you're strengthening them. I don't think that's actually happening, though, in meditation practice. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you basically my take on this. Many years ago, I had a dialogue with Rick Hansen about the difference between developing good, wholesome qualities in meditation from the kind of directed way, where you go into a meditation sitting and you actually are intentionally creating compassion for yourself or loving kindness and directing your attention to good qualities, knowing that the brain, may have difficulty making those stick. So the idea then in those practices of continuing to practice loving kindness or compassion is so that you train the mind and have those qualities, just really, they stay because the mind has been trained. So it's a form of conditioning, essentially. What I said to him, and what my take is that you go through your meditation sitting and you find that you're upset about somebody for a while, and that you're with that experience, you're kinder to yourself around it, you're gentler, and you may find that you see it from different angles, and there are little periods of some, maybe empathy, sympathy, compassion. Maybe you end up not upset, but friendlier. And that is actually planting those wholesome states, those better qualities within your lived experience. Like your mind is learning how to, in a sense, come around to those qualities more of its own on its own, and that is a different kind of cultivation. And that the remembering, the recollecting after the sitting, that you actually did arrive at compassion, that you started to feel less, upset or tense around a certain situation, that you actually were able to say, loosen around a particular story or self-identity, that is training the mind. You're strengthening various mental activities that are wholesome by recalling them and by bringing back your real experience and valuing it. And not enough research has been done in that area, I believe. That really because, it's really hard to track. But I would say, experiment with this, see how this works. See if your compassion arises out of a scenario that starts with ill will and misunderstanding and difficulties. See if that internal arising of compassion is somehow more, more organic. You're more connected with it. It has a different feel to it than if you're trying to overlay and put compassionate thoughts onto a situation that you're having difficulty with, and that you feel you should arrive at compassion. So I don't know if I'll be getting any more questions. I'm not too sure if this program is working as well as it should be. But I do want to just say that doing these talks is a great pleasure for me, and having this meditation sitting with you, no matter how many people show up or whatever we go through. But for me, on my end, this has been very satisfying. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending and being good listeners, and I hope to be able to see you again, and perhaps in another format where we can interact. If you'd like to give a donation for this kind of teaching, you can always go to Against the Stream and make an offering. And so I'd just like to say goodbye and be well. Now, and Instagram now. Thank you. And I'll end Facebook now.